long before the pyramids cast their long shadows across the sands of Egypt, and indeed, long before the earliest written words etched themselves into clay tablets, the story of what would one day be known as Ethiopia began, not with kings or empires, but with the very dawn of humanity itself. It was in the sun-drenched valleys and rolling hills of this ancient land, specifically in the Afar Depression, that the faint echoes of our earliest ancestors first resonated. Some 3.2 million years ago, imagine a landscape vast and untamed, where volcanic peaks pierce the sky, and the Great Rift Valley, a colossal scar across the Earth's surface, slowly stretched and deepened. Here, amidst acacia trees and ancient riverbeds, a small bipedal hominid, famously nicknamed Lucy, scientific designation Australopithecus afarensis, took her first tentative steps, a moment that forever altered the trajectory of life on this planet. Her skeletal remains, discovered in 1974, offered irrefutable proof that upright walking, a hallmark of humanity, originated in this very region, long before the development of complex tools or language. The narrative then fast-forwards, not in a sudden leap, but through countless millennia, each one adding subtle layers to the evolving tapestry of life. Hunter-gatherer societies thrived, adapting to the changing climates, their lives intricately woven into the rhythms of the land. They learned to read the signs of the seasons, to track game across vast plains, and to find sustenance in the bountiful flora. The whispers of their existence are found in scattered stone tools, in the faint impressions of their hearths, and in the enduring resilience of the land itself. These early communities, though lacking the grand structures of later civilizations, laid the foundational knowledge of the environment, passing down oral traditions and practical skills that would underpin future developments. As the millennia continued their slow march, around 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, a profound shift began to occur across the globe, and Ethiopia was no exception. The advent of agriculture. The wild grains and domesticated animals, perhaps first cultivated in the Fertile Crescent, slowly made their way south, or perhaps indigenous species were independently domesticated in the Ethiopian highlands. This transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming communities marked a pivotal moment. Villages began to form, populations grew, and with stability came the opportunity for specialization. People could dedicate time to crafts, to building more permanent shelters, and to developing more sophisticated social structures. The land, once merely a provider, became a partner, its rich volcanic soils proving particularly amenable to cultivation. The story then shifts towards the emergence of more complex societies, a period shrouded in a beautiful mist of legend and archaeological intrigue. Around the 8th to 5th centuries BCE, a fascinating kingdom known as Damat, pronounced Damat, began to coalesce in the northern highlands of what is now Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. This was not yet the Ethiopia we recognize, but rather a precursor, a powerful entity that drew heavily from influences across the Red Sea. Imagine a landscape dotted with emerging towns, where trade routes began to crisscross, bringing exotic goods and new ideas. The people of Damat were skilled artisans, farmers, and crucially, traders. Their strategic location, commanding routes between the African interior and the Arabian Peninsula, allowed them to flourish. One of the most striking aspects of Damat was its strong connection to the Sabaean kingdom in present-day Yemen. Historians still debate the precise nature of this relationship. Was Damat a colony of Saba? Was it an independent kingdom heavily influenced by Sabaean culture and religion? Or was it a symbiotic relationship of equals? The archaeological evidence points to a significant cultural exchange. Inscript. Sections found at sites like Yeha, considered the capital or at least a major center of Dimt, are often written in a script very similar to Old South Arabian. The magnificent Great Temple of Yiha, a towering structure built without mortar, with perfectly cut and fitted limestone blocks, bears a striking resemblance to Sabaean architectural styles. It stands as a silent testament to the sophisticated engineering and religious practices of this early kingdom. The temple, dedicated to the moon god Almaka, suggests a shared pantheon with their Arabian counterparts, further blurring the lines between these two ancient worlds. The Dimpt kingdom was not merely a reflection of Sabaean influence, it was a vibrant and distinct entity in its own right. Its rulers, known by the title Mukarib, held both religious and political authority. They oversaw an agricultural system that produced grains, particularly teff, a tiny, nutritious grain indigenous to the region that remains a staple food in Ethiopia today. They also managed extensive trade networks, exchanging ivory, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, precious commodities from the African interior, for textiles, metals, and other manufactured goods from across the Red Sea. The existence of these intricate trade routes, long before the rise of the Roman Empire, highlights the interconnectedness of the ancient world and the significant role played by this region. One lesser-known detail about Dimpt is the presence of elaborate irrigation systems. While the Great Temple of Yiha is often highlighted, the engineering prowess extended to managing water resources in a challenging terrain. Evidence suggests they constructed dams and canals to harness seasonal rains, allowing for more consistent agricultural yields and supporting a larger population. This sophisticated approach to resource management speaks to a well-organized society with a deep understanding of its environment. The ability to sustain a large population through advanced agricultural techniques was a key factor in their rise to prominence. The decline of Dimpt, much like its origins, is a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. Around the 5th century BCE, the kingdom seems to have fragmented, giving way to smaller regional polities. The reasons for this decline are not entirely clear. Perhaps environmental changes, such as prolonged droughts, strained their agricultural capacity. It's also possible that internal conflicts or shifts in trade routes weakened their central authority. Some theories suggest that the very strong Sabaean influence might have waned, leading to a more localized development of distinct Ethiopian cultures. What is certain is that Dimpt did not simply vanish. Rather, its legacy lived on, contributing to the cultural and political landscape that would eventually give rise to the mighty kingdom of Aksum. The architectural styles, the agricultural practices, and perhaps even some of the administrative structures of Dimpt likely provided a foundation upon which Aksum would build its own impressive empire. The period following Dimt's fragmentation, often referred to as the pre-Aksumite period, is less well documented, but no less important. It was a time of transition where various local chiefdoms and smaller kingdoms emerged, each vying for influence and control over trade routes. This era saw the gradual development of distinct Ethiopian cultural traits, moving away from the more overtly Sabaean influences. New forms of pottery, different burial practices, and the slow evolution of indigenous scripts began to appear. It was a crucible of cultural blending and innovation, where the seeds of a unique Ethiopian identity were sown. The Red Sea remained a vital artery for trade and cultural exchange, but the focus began to shift towards consolidating power within the African highlands themselves. Imagine small, fortified settlements perched atop hills, their inhabitants developing unique traditions and adapting to the diverse microclimates of the Ethiopian plateau. These communities were not isolated. They interacted, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through trade, gradually forging a more cohesive regional identity. The oral histories and archaeological findings from this period are fragmented, like pieces of an ancient mosaic, but they collectively paint a picture of a dynamic and evolving society. The resilience of the people, their ability to innovate and adapt, allowed them to not only survive, but to lay the groundwork for future greatness. The stage was slowly being set for the rise of Aksum, a kingdom that would not only dominate the region, but also become one of the great powers of the ancient world, standing alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The foundations laid by Lucy's first steps, the agricultural innovations, the sophisticated trade networks of Demet, and the subsequent period of regional consolidation all contributed to the fertile ground from which Aksum would spring. The history of Ethiopia is a continuous flow, a river whose currents carry the echoes of millions of years, each era building upon the last, shaping the land and its people. The very air in these ancient lands seems to hum with the untold stories of countless generations, their lives intertwined with the rugged beauty of the landscape. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. From the whispers of Punt, the narrative currents shifted, gathering strength and form in the highlands, coalescing into something new, something grander. The very earth seemed to hum with a nascent power as the sun climbed higher over the rugged peaks of what would become the northern Ethiopian plateau. This was the dawn of Aksum, a civilization that would not merely trade with the great powers of its age, but stand among them, a beacon of innovation and faith in the heart of Africa. The transition from those earlier, perhaps more fragmented entities to a unified, formidable empire was not a sudden burst, but a gradual accretion of influence, wealth, and strategic acumen. Aksum's true ascendancy began around the 1st century CE, though its roots stretched back further into the pre-Aksumite period, drawing from the cultural and linguistic tapestry woven by earlier peoples. Its strategic location was paramount, perched on the crossroads of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the wider Indian Ocean trade routes. Imagine, if you will, caravans laden with gold, ivory, rhinoceros horn, and frankincense, winding their way down from the highlands, their destinations, the bustling ports along the Red Sea. And from the sea, ships returned, their holds filled with textiles, spices, precious metals, and exotic goods from distant lands, India, Persia, and even the Roman Empire. This vibrant exchange of goods was the lifeblood of Aksum, fueling its growth and allowing it to project its power far beyond its immediate borders. The city of Aksum itself, nestled in a fertile valley, became a hub of immense activity. Its architecture, even in its earliest forms, spoke of ambition. Unlike the more ephemeral structures of earlier times, Aksumite builders began to master stone, creating multi-storied palaces and grand tombs. The most iconic symbols of Aksumite power, however, were the towering stelae, monolithic obelisks carved from single blocks of granite. These colossal monuments, some reaching over 30 meters in height, were not merely decorative. They served as grave markers for Aksumite kings and nobles, silent sentinels guarding the memories of a powerful elite. The great stelae of Aksum, now fallen and broken, once stood as the tallest monolithic structure ever erected in the ancient world, a testament to the engineering prowess and organizational capabilities of the Aksumite people. Historians still debate the precise methods used to quarry, transport, and erect these massive stones, with theories ranging from complex lever systems to earth ramps, each attempting to unravel the secrets of their construction. Perhaps these silent giants, standing against the vast African sky, were intended to touch the heavens, connecting the earthly power of the kings with the divine. The Aksumite kings, or Nagus, were not just rulers, they were seen as divinely appointed, their authority extending over a vast and diverse population. Their reach expanded steadily, incorporating neighboring territories and establishing a network of client states. By the 3rd century CE, Aksum was recognized as one of the 4 great powers of the ancient world, alongside Persia, Rome, and China. This was no small feat for an African kingdom, and it speaks volumes about its economic might and military strength. Aksumite coins, minted in gold, silver, and bronze, circulated widely, bearing the images of their kings, and sometimes the crescent moon and disk symbols, reflecting their pre-Christian religious beliefs. These coins, found as far afield as India, are tangible evidence of Aksum's extensive trade network and its status as a major player in global commerce. One of the most transformative events in Aksumite history was its adoption of Christianity. This pivotal moment occurred during the reign of King Ezana in the 4th century CE. The story, as recounted by Rufinus of Aquileia, involves 2 Syrian brothers, Frumentius and Adicius, who were shipwrecked on the Aksumite coast. Frumentius, through his intelligence and piety, rose to prominence in the royal court, eventually becoming a tutor to the young prince Ezana. He subtly introduced Christian teachings, and upon Ezana's ascension to the throne, the king embraced the new faith. This was not merely a personal conversion. Ezana declared Christianity the official religion of the kingdom. The change was profound. Aksumite coins, which once featured pagan symbols, began to bear the cross. Churches were built, and the kingdom became a bastion of Christianity in a region largely dominated by traditional African religions, and later, Islam. This early adoption of Christianity, long before many European nations, gave Aksum a unique identity and forged a lasting spiritual bond with the Coptic Church of Egypt. It also set the stage for Ethiopia's enduring Christian heritage, a distinct and ancient tradition that continues to thrive to this day. The Aksumite Empire reached its zenith in the 5th and 6th centuries CE. Its control extended over much of modern-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and parts of Sudan and Yemen. Aksumite armies, known for their discipline and effectiveness, crossed the Red Sea to intervene in affairs on the Arabian Peninsula, notably in the Himyarite Kingdom of Yemen. One such intervention, led by King Caleb in the early 6th century, was to protect the Christian population there from persecution by a Jewish king. This expedition, vividly described in historical texts, demonstrated Aksum's willingness and ability to project its power across the sea, further solidifying its reputation as a formidable regional force. The military campaigns were not merely for conquest, but often to secure trade routes and protect religious minorities, reflecting a complex interplay of economic and ideological motivations. Despite its grandeur, the Aksumite Empire, like all great civilizations, eventually faced challenges. The rise of Islam in the 7th century CE profoundly altered the geopolitical landscape of the Red Sea region. While Aksum initially maintained peaceful relations with the early Muslim communities, even offering refuge to some of the Prophet Muhammad's followers, the expansion of Islamic empires gradually isolated Aksum from its traditional trading partners. The Red Sea, once a vibrant conduit for Aksumite commerce, became increasingly dominated by Muslim naval power. This shift in trade routes and the gradual decline in international commerce began to erode Aksum's economic foundations. The exact reasons for Aksum's decline are multifaceted and still debated among scholars. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, protracted process. Environmental factors, such as deforestation and soil erosion, might have contributed to agricultural decline, impacting the empire's ability to sustain its large population. Internal political strife, though less documented, could also have played a role. However, the most significant factor was likely the economic isolation brought about by the shift in global trade patterns. As the flow of goods dwindled, so too did the wealth that had sustained the empire's elaborate infrastructure, military, and royal court. The capital city of Aksum, once a bustling metropolis, gradually lost its prominence. The center of power began to shift southward, deeper into the Ethiopian highlands, away from the coastal pressures. The legacy of Aksum, however, did not vanish. Its cultural and religious traditions endured, shaping the subsequent history of Ethiopia. The Aksumite script, Ge'ez, continued to be used for religious texts and official documents, becoming the foundation for later Ethiopian languages. The architectural styles, though evolving, retained elements of Aksumite design. Most importantly, the Christian faith, so deeply rooted by King Ezana, became the bedrock of Ethiopian identity, fostering a unique cultural and spiritual heritage that persisted through centuries of isolation and challenges. The memory of Aksum, with its towering stele and its powerful kings, remained a source of pride and inspiration for the succeeding dynasties, a golden age etched into the collective consciousness of the Ethiopian people. The empire, though diminished, did not disappear. It transformed, its spirit migrating, like a seed carried by the wind, to sprout new forms in the fertile highlands. The whispers of Aksum's decline carried on the winds, not as a sudden collapse, but a gradual fading, like the last embers of a grand fire. The heart of power, once beating strongly in the northern highlands, began to shift, and with it, a new chapter unfolded, steeped in faith and carved from the very earth itself. This was the era of the Zagwe dynasty, a period often seen as a bridge between the ancient Aksumite glory and the Solomonic resurgence, yet one that forged its own unique and indelible mark on the Ethiopian landscape and spirit. The Zagwe rulers, emerging from the Agao people, a Cushitic-speaking group native to the region, established their capital in a place that would become synonymous with their legacy, Adefa, later known as Roha, and finally Lalibela. Unlike the Aksumites, who built towering stelae and grand palaces from quarried stone, the Zagwe turned to a different canvas, the living rock beneath their feet. It was a profound act of devotion, born perhaps from a desire to create something enduring, something that would literally rise from the earth as a testament to their faith. The precise origins of the Zagwe dynasty remain a subject of historical debate, shrouded in the mists of oral tradition and later written accounts. Some narratives suggest a direct lineage from Aksumite generals, while others portray them as a distinct, indigenous power that rose as Aksum's influence waned. What is clear is that by the 12th and 13th centuries, the Zagwe held sway over a significant portion of the Ethiopian highlands, fostering a period of remarkable spiritual and architectural innovation. Their reign is generally placed from around 1137 AD to 1270 AD, a relatively short span compared to the long centuries of Aksum, yet one that left an astonishing legacy. The most iconic manifestation of this legacy is undoubtedly the cluster of 11 monolithic churches in Lalibela, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that continues to inspire awe and wonder. Imagine, if you will, not buildings constructed brick by brick, but structures sculpted downwards, carved from single colossal blocks of volcanic rock. The process involved first excavating a deep trench around a chosen rock mass, isolating it from the surrounding earth. Then, from the top down, artisans and laborers meticulously chiseled away, shaping roofs, carving out interiors, fashioning windows, doors, pillars, and altars, all from the same piece of stone. It was an undertaking of immense scale and precision, requiring not only immense labor, but also sophisticated engineering knowledge and an unwavering vision. The churches are not merely crude excavations, they are masterpieces of architecture, each with distinct features and intricate details. There is Bete Medene Alem, the house of the Savior of the world, believed to be the largest monolithic church in the world, its roof supported by a forest of massive pillars. Its sheer scale is breathtaking, evoking a sense of ancient grandeur. Then there is Bete Georgis, the House of St. George, perhaps the most perfectly preserved and iconic of them all. Carved in the shape of a cross, standing isolated in a deep pit. Its cruciform roof flush with the surrounding ground. Its elegant symmetry and striking form are a testament to the Zagwe artisan's skill. The spiritual fervor of the Zagwe era was intense. With the decline of Aksum and the rise of Islamic power across the Red Sea, Ethiopia found itself increasingly isolated from the wider Christian world. This isolation, rather than diminishing their faith, seemed to deepen it, fostering a unique expression of Christianity. The Zagwe rulers, most notably King Lalibela, whose reign is traditionally placed in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, are credited with commissioning many of these extraordinary churches. Legend has it that King Lalibela sought to create a new Jerusalem in Ethiopia, a pilgrimage site for those unable to journey to the Holy Land. The names of the churches themselves, such as Bete Mariam, House of Mary, or Bete Golgotha, reflect this profound connection to biblical sites. The construction methods employed by the Zagwe engineers are still marveled at today. How did they manage to achieve such precise measurements and complex designs within a single rock mass? How did they remove the enormous quantities of excavated stone? While some legends speak of angelic assistance, the reality points to generations of skilled craftsmen utilizing iron tools, chisels, and hammers, working in a highly organized fashion. The sheer volume of material removed, estimated to be hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock, is staggering. This lesser-known detail of the Zagwe period, the meticulous planning and execution required to create these inverted structures, often gets overshadowed by the wonder of the churches themselves. It speaks to a society with sophisticated organizational capabilities, able to mobilize and direct vast resources towards a common, deeply spiritual goal. The churches are interconnected by a labyrinth of tunnels and passages, some carved deep into the rock, others open to the sky. These passages, often dark and winding, add to the mystical atmosphere, creating a sense of journey and discovery for pilgrims. Within the churches, the interiors are often surprisingly spacious, yet intimate, with shafts of light filtering in through carefully placed windows, illuminating ancient frescoes and rock-hewn altars. The air inside is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of incense and the echoes of centuries of prayers. Beyond the architectural marvels, The Zagwe period also saw a flourishing of religious literature and art. Monasteries continued to be centers of learning, preserving ancient texts and producing new ones. Illuminated manuscripts, though fewer from this specific period, continued the artistic traditions of Aksum, often incorporating intricate geometric patterns and stylized figures. The spiritual devotion of the time was not confined to grand structures, but permeated daily life, shaping cultural practices and artistic expressions. However, the Zagwe dynasty, for all its remarkable achievements, eventually faced challenges. The Solomonic dynasty, which would succeed them, claimed direct lineage from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, framing the Zagwe as usurpers. This narrative, while serving the political legitimacy of the Solomonic rulers, tended to diminish the Zagwe's historical importance in later chronicles. Historians still disagree whether the transition from Zagwe to Solomonic rule was a violent overthrow or a more gradual shift in power, perhaps through intermarriage or political maneuvering. Some accounts suggest a decisive battle, while others hint at a peaceful succession, perhaps orchestrated by the powerful clergy. This historical ambiguity adds another layer of intrigue to the Zagwe story, leaving space for scholarly debate and differing interpretations of the past. Despite the later Solomonic narrative, the Zagwe period was undeniably a golden age for Ethiopian Christianity, consolidating its unique identity and creating enduring symbols of faith. The churches of Lalibela stand as a permanent testament to their spiritual depth and architectural genius, a unique contribution to world heritage. They are not merely buildings, they are sculpted prayers, carved from the very heart of the earth, echoing the profound devotion of a people who sought to bring heaven closer to their mountainous home. The decline of the Zagwe, whenever and however it occurred, paved the way for the resurgence of a narrative deeply rooted in the ancient past, the Solomonic line. Yet the legacy of the rock-hewn churches remained, silent witnesses to a period of intense creativity and unwavering faith. They continued to draw pilgrims, their cool stone walls whispering stories of devotion, resilience, and the extraordinary human capacity to transform the mundane into the sacred. The transition from Zagwe to Solomonic rule marked not an end, but a new beginning, building upon the foundations laid by their predecessors, even as the political landscape shifted. The spiritual heart of Ethiopia, however, continued to beat strongly, nourished by the deep roots of faith that the Zagwe had so profoundly etched into the very fabric of the land. The whispers of a new dawn stirred across the high plateaus, a quiet promise carried on the wind after centuries of fragmented power. A new lineage, claiming direct descent from the ancient Solomonic kings, began to gather strength, its roots reaching deep into the soil of tradition and prophecy. This was not a sudden explosion of power, but a patient, deliberate reweaving of the threads of authority that had frayed and snapped over generations. The Zagwe dynasty, for all its architectural marvels and spiritual fervor, had always existed in the shadow of this older, more potent claim. And now, the time had come for that shadow to lengthen and finally envelop the land once more. The figure often credited with this momentous shift was Yakuno Amlak, a name that echoes with the sound of destiny. Emerging from the region of Amhara, he was said to be a descendant of Dil Naod, the last of the Aksumite kings. His rise was not marked by brutal conquest, but by a more subtle assertion of legitimacy, a careful navigation of the political landscape. The narrative woven around him spoke of divine sanction, of the restoration of a rightful order. Around 1270 CE, Yakuno Amlak successfully challenged and ultimately deposed the last Zagwe ruler, Yetbarak. This transition, while certainly involving conflict, is often portrayed in historical accounts as a return to an ordained path, a rectification of a long-standing deviation. It was as if the very spirit of the land exhaled, recognizing its true sovereign. With Yakuno Amlak's ascension, the Solomonic dynasty was formally re-established, ushering in an era that would span centuries and profoundly shape the identity of Ethiopia. His reign marked the beginning of a period of renewed centralization, though the vastness of the empire and the challenges of communication meant that regional autonomy still held considerable sway. Yet the symbolic power of the Solomonic claim was immense. It provided a unifying narrative, a golden thread connecting the present to a glorious, almost mythical past, back to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon himself. This narrative, enshrined in texts like the Kebra Nagast, became the bedrock of royal authority, asserting that the Ethiopian emperors were not merely earthly rulers, but divinely chosen custodians of a sacred lineage. The early Solomonic emperors understood that true power lay not just in military might, but in cultural and spiritual consolidation. This period saw a remarkable flourishing of religious scholarship and artistic expression. Monasteries, often situated in remote, breathtaking locations, became centers of learning and creativity. It was within their quiet walls, under the patient hands of scribes and illuminators, that the most exquisite works of art were produced. Manuscript illumination reached new heights, transforming sacred texts into dazzling visual spectacles. Imagine a monk hunched over a vellum page, his breath misting in the cool air, meticulously applying vibrant pigments derived from crushed minerals and plants. Each brushstroke was an act of devotion, each intricate pattern a prayer. These manuscripts were not merely books, they were treasures, imbued with spiritual significance, their covers often adorned with precious metals and jewels. The artistic style of this period, while deeply rooted in earlier Aksumite and Byzantine traditions, began to develop its own distinct Ethiopian character. Figures in these illuminations often possess large, expressive eyes, and their robes flow with a graceful, almost ethereal quality. The use of bright, contrasting colors, deep reds, brilliant blues, and luminous golds created a sense of otherworldly beauty. These illuminated manuscripts, often containing gospels, psalters, and liturgical texts, served multiple purposes. They were tools for worship, educational resources, and powerful symbols of royal and ecclesiastical prestige. They also played a crucial role in preserving knowledge and history, carrying forward the stories and traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Beyond the artistic flourishing, the Solomonic Restoration was also a period of intense intellectual activity. Theological debates were common, and scholars engaged with texts from across the Christian world, adapting and integrating them into their unique theological framework. The Ge'ez language, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, remained the language of scholarship and religious texts, ensuring a continuity with the Aksumite past. However, Amharic, the language of the ruling dynasty, began its slow ascent as the language of administration and everyday life, a subtle shift that would have profound implications for the linguistic landscape of the empire. The assertion of dynastic legitimacy was a constant theme throughout this era. The emperors actively promoted the Solomonic narrative through various means, through the patronage of religious institutions, the commissioning of historical chronicles, and the grand ceremonies that marked their reigns. They were not just kings, they were the guardians of a sacred covenant, the living embodiment of a divine promise. This emphasis on legitimacy was particularly important given the ever-present challenges from regional lords and the occasional internal disputes over succession. Historians still debate the precise extent to which the Solomonic claim was universally accepted without question across all parts of the vast empire, or if it was more a powerful ideological tool wielded by the central authority. There were certainly instances of local resistance and independent movements, suggesting that while the narrative was potent, its practical application could be uneven. One of the lesser-known aspects of this period is the role of the imperial court as a mobile entity. Unlike many European monarchies that established fixed capitals, the early Solomonic emperors often moved their court from place to place, establishing temporary encampments that could be quite elaborate. This mobility served several purposes. It allowed the emperor to exert direct control over different regions, to collect taxes more efficiently, and to avoid becoming too entrenched in any single locality, which might foster regional power bases. Imagine a vast procession winding its way through the highlands. The emperor and his retinue, advisors, soldiers, servants, artisans, and even the royal library, all on the move. This constant movement was a logistical marvel and a testament to the organizational capacity of the early Solomonic state. It also meant that the influence of the court, and thus the Solomonic narrative, was spread more widely across the land. The reigns of subsequent emperors built upon the foundations laid by Yakuno Amlak. Dawit I, who ruled from 1382 to 1413, was a significant patron of the arts and a keen diplomat. He engaged in correspondence with various European powers, including Venice and Genoa, demonstrating Ethiopia's awareness of and engagement with the wider world. It was during his reign that the first known Ethiopian embassy to Europe was dispatched, a remarkable journey that speaks to the growing confidence and outward-looking perspective of the Solomonic court. These diplomatic overtures were often driven by a desire to secure alliances against perceived threats, particularly from the growing power of Mamluk Egypt, which controlled the Patriarchate of Alexandria, the traditional source of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's spiritual leadership. Another pivotal figure was Zara Yacob, who reigned from 1434 to 1468. His rule is often considered a golden age of Solomonic power and intellectual rigor. Zara Yacob was a formidable ruler, a prolific writer, and a staunch defender of the Orthodox faith. He undertook significant administrative reforms, strengthening the central government and attempting to unify religious practices across the empire. He was deeply concerned with rooting out what he perceived as pagan practices and heresies, issuing numerous decrees and writing theological treatises to guide his subjects. His reign saw a renewed emphasis on religious purity and the suppression of local cults that diverged from official doctrine. This period, while marked by intellectual vibrancy, also saw instances of severe persecution against those deemed heretical, highlighting the complex interplay of faith and power. Zara Yacob's intellectual contributions were immense. He authored several important theological works, including the Book of Light, Mesafint Berhan, and the Book of the Nativity, Mesafint Milad, which articulated his theological views and his vision for a unified Christian Ethiopia. He also established new churches and monasteries, further solidifying the institutional framework of the church. His efforts to standardize religious practices and strengthen the church's authority were crucial in shaping the unique character of Ethiopian orthodoxy. He even introduced new religious festivals, further weaving the fabric of faith into the daily lives of his people. The Solomonic restoration was not without its challenges. The empire was vast and diverse, encompassing numerous ethnic groups and linguistic communities. Maintaining control over such a sprawling territory especially given the rugged terrain, was a constant struggle. Rebellions by regional leaders were not uncommon, and the threat of external invasions, particularly from the Adal Sultanate in the east, remained a persistent concern. The long-standing rivalry with Adal, a Muslim state, often flared into open conflict, shaping the military and diplomatic strategies of the Solomonic emperors for centuries. These conflicts, though often brutal, also spurred innovation in military organization and defensive strategies. Despite these challenges, the Solomonic dynasty endured, largely due to its powerful legitimizing narrative and its ability to adapt. The imperial court, while mobile, also fostered centers of learning and artistic production that left an indelible mark on Ethiopian culture. The legacy of this period is still visible today in the magnificent illuminated manuscripts housed in monasteries and museums, in the architectural styles of churches, and in the enduring power of the Solomonic narrative in the national consciousness. The assertion of dynastic legitimacy was not merely a political maneuver. It was a profound act of cultural self-definition, anchoring Ethiopia's identity in a lineage that stretched back to the dawn of time, a connection to ancient wisdom and divine favor that resonated deeply with its people. The quiet rustle of parchment, the gentle glow of a flickering oil lamp, the rhythmic chant of prayers, these were the sounds and sights of a civilization finding its voice anew. The Solomonic restoration was a testament to the power of ideas, of history, and of faith to shape a nation. It was a period when the threads of the past were carefully picked up and rewoven, creating a tapestry of power, piety, and artistic brilliance that would define Ethiopia for centuries to come. The emperors, through their patronage and their personal devotion, ensured that the light of learning and faith continued to shine, illuminating a path forward for their ancient kingdom. And so, the story of Ethiopia continued to unfold, carried forward on the currents of time, ever evolving, yet always remembering its profound and sacred origins. As the Solomonic line re-established its firm grip on the highlands, a new chapter unfolded, one that saw the nomadic imperial court begin to settle, to root itself in a single, magnificent city. This was the dawn of Gondar. For centuries, the Ethiopian emperors had moved with their retinue, a grand mobile capital shifting from fertile plain to strategic mountain, a testament to their dominion over a vast and varied landscape. But by the early 17th century, Emperor Fasilides, who reigned from 1632 to 1667, decided to break with this ancient tradition. He chose a site in the northern Amhara region, a place blessed with abundant water and a commanding view, to build a permanent capital, a city that would become a symbol of Ethiopian power and artistic achievement. Imagine the bustling activity that must have characterized those early years of construction. The air would have been thick with the dust of quarried stone, the rhythmic clang of hammers, and the shouts of laborers. Fasilides, a visionary ruler, began by erecting a magnificent castle, a structure that still stands today as the centerpiece of what would become a sprawling imperial compound. This castle, often called Fasil Gebi, was not merely a defensive fortress. It was a palace designed for regal living, its sturdy stone walls rising against the Ethiopian sky, its turrets and battlements hinting at both strength and grandeur. Its architecture was a fascinating blend of local traditions and influences from abroad, perhaps from the Portuguese who had established a presence in the region decades earlier, or even from the architectural styles of India brought by merchants and travelers. Historians still debate the precise origins of some of the more distinctive architectural elements found in Gonderine buildings, wondering whether certain decorative motifs or structural innovations were truly indigenous or adapted from foreign designs. Beyond the initial castle, Fasilides commissioned other structures: a library, a chancellery, and even a lion house, reflecting the imperial fascination with these majestic beasts. His successors continued this grand project, each adding their own contributions to the growing city. Emperor Johannes I, Fasilides' son, built his own castle, slightly smaller but equally imposing, within the same compound. Later, Emperor Iyasu I, known as Iyasu the Great, added a magnificent church, Debre Birhan Selassie, whose interior frescoes, depicting angels with Ethiopian features, remain a breathtaking example of Gonderine artistry. These churches were not just places of worship, they were canvases for a vibrant artistic tradition, where skilled painters and scribes illuminated manuscripts and adorned walls with intricate biblical scenes. The colors used, often derived from local minerals and plants, still retain a remarkable vibrancy today, whispering stories of devotion and artistic mastery. Gondar quickly blossomed into a thriving metropolis, a hub of commerce, culture, and intellectual life. Merchants from distant lands, carrying silks, spices, and precious metals, converged on its markets. Scholars and theologians gathered in its churches and monastic schools, debating intricate points of scripture and philosophy. The city became a melting pot of ideas, a place where the ancient traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church flourished alongside new influences. This period, often referred to as the Gondarine period, from the 17th to the mid-18th century, is considered a golden age for Ethiopian art, architecture, and literature. Royal chronicles, meticulously kept by court scribes, provide invaluable insights into the daily life of the emperors, their military campaigns, and the cultural achievements of the era. These chronicles, often beautifully illustrated, are a testament to the sophisticated literary tradition that thrived in Gondar. Yet even within this period of splendor, the seeds of internal strife were occasionally sown. The Solomonic dynasty, while firmly re-established, was not immune to challenges. Succession disputes, often fueled by ambitious nobles or rival factions within the imperial family, sometimes erupted into open conflict. These periods of instability, though often brief, could cast a shadow over the city's otherwise brilliant facade. One such period of intense internal conflict, known as the Zemene Mesafint, or Era of Princes, followed the Gondarine period, lasting from the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century. During this time, the power of the emperors in Gondar waned significantly, and regional warlords and powerful noble families vied for control, effectively fragmenting the empire into a collection of semi-autonomous states. While the emperors still resided in Gondar, their authority often extended little beyond the city walls, and they became largely figureheads, manipulated by the powerful regional lords. Imagine the shift in atmosphere during the Zemene Mesafint. The grand palaces of Gondar, once bustling with imperial activity, might have felt a little emptier, their splendor a quiet echo of past glories. The vibrant intellectual debates might have been overshadowed by the clatter of weapons and the anxieties of shifting allegiances. Despite this political fragmentation, Gondar retained its symbolic importance as the imperial capital, and its churches and artistic traditions continued, albeit perhaps with less direct royal patronage. The city, even in its reduced political stature, remained a beacon of Ethiopian culture and a repository of its rich history. One of the more obscure details from this era concerns the unique architectural style of the Gondarine baths of Fasilides. These baths, located a short distance from the main castle compound, are not merely a functional bathing pool, but a complex structure surrounded by a two-story building. During the annual Timkat festival, commemorating the baptism of Jesus, the pool is filled with water, and a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, known as a tabot, is brought in a colorful procession. The scene is one of profound spiritual significance and vibrant communal celebration. The surrounding building, with its arched windows and sturdy stone, suggests a design that was both practical and aesthetically pleasing, perhaps even used for royal contemplation or leisure during other times of the year. The very act of constructing such elaborate baths speaks to a certain refinement and appreciation for comfort and ritual within the imperial court. The debates surrounding the Gonderine period often touch upon the extent of foreign influence on its art and architecture. While the Portuguese certainly had a presence in Ethiopia, and their Jesuit missionaries attempted to convert the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to Catholicism, their direct architectural impact on Gondar remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Some argue that the European influence was more superficial, limited to certain decorative elements or construction techniques, while the core of Gondarine architecture remained distinctly Ethiopian. Others point to the presence of European artisans and craftsmen, who might have contributed to the construction of some of the more elaborate structures. The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between, a testament to the dynamic interplay of cultures that characterized Ethiopia's long history. The Gondarine period, in many ways, represents a unique synthesis where external ideas were absorbed and transformed into something uniquely Ethiopian. Even as the Zemene Mesafint saw the political power of Gondar diminish, the city itself endured. Its churches continued to hold services, its markets continued to trade, and its people continued to live their lives amidst the stone palaces and ancient trees. The very stones of Fossil Gebi, weathered by centuries of sun and rain, stood as silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of imperial power, to periods of dazzling glory and moments of quiet decline. They whisper stories of emperors and empresses, of scholars and saints, of merchants and pilgrims, all woven into the rich tapestry of Ethiopian history. The lasting legacy of Gondar is not just its impressive architecture, but its embodiment of a unified Ethiopian identity, a cultural heart that continued to beat even when the political body was fragmented. It reminds us that power can be fleeting, but art, faith, and the spirit of a people can endure through the ages, leaving behind echoes of beauty and wisdom for all who care to listen. As the sun dipped below the rugged peaks, casting long shadows across the Ethiopian highlands, a new era began to unfold, one marked by a profound shift in the very fabric of power. The centralized authority that had long been the bedrock of the Solomonic dynasty began to fray, its threads unraveling into a tapestry of regional ambitions and shifting loyalties. This period, known as the Zemene Mesafint, or the Era of Princes, was a time when the imperial throne, though still theoretically supreme, became a mere shadow, a symbol around which powerful regional lords, the Mesafint, vied for dominance. The vibrant court life of Gondar, once the glittering heart of the empire, slowly dimmed, its grand halls echoing with the whispers of forgotten glory as real power dispersed across the vast and varied landscapes. Imagine the grand imperial palace in Gondar, its stone walls, once vibrant with the comings and goings of emperors and courtiers, now bearing the quiet dust of neglect. While an emperor, often a figurehead, still resided there, his decrees held little sway beyond the immediate vicinity of the capital. Instead, the true reins of power were clutched in the hands of formidable regional rulers, the Oromo leaders in the south, the Tigrayan warlords in the north, and the Amhara potentates in the central highlands. Each of these powerful figures commanded their own armies, collected their own taxes, and, perhaps most significantly, pursued their own foreign policies, often in direct conflict with one another. This fragmentation was not a sudden cataclysm, but a gradual erosion, a slow seeping away of centralized control that had been building for decades, perhaps even centuries, as the empire's vastness stretched its administrative capacity thin. One of the key factors contributing to this decentralization was the increasing influence of the Oromo people. Migrating into the Ethiopian highlands over several centuries, particularly from the 16th century onwards, the Oromo had become a significant demographic and military force. Their distinct social structures and martial prowess meant they were not easily assimilated into the existing imperial framework. Instead, various Oromo groups established their own powerful polities, such as the Yeju Oromo, who eventually came to exert immense influence over the imperial court itself. By the late 18th century, the Yeju Oromo dynasty, through figures like Ras Ali I and his successors, effectively controlled the appointment of emperors, reducing the Solomonic line to little more than puppets. This was a profound shift, as for the first time in centuries, the imperial power was overtly controlled by a non-Amhara, non-Tigrayan group, challenging the traditional foundations of the monarchy. The political landscape of the Zemene Mesafint was a complex mosaic of alliances and betrayals. One moment, two Mesafint might be allied against a third, and the next, their loyalties would shift like desert sands. Battles were frequent, not grand imperial campaigns, but localized skirmishes and raids, often aimed at seizing territory, resources, or even the imperial puppet himself. The concept of a unified Ethiopia, while still a cultural and religious ideal, was practically non-existent. Trade routes became perilous, as merchants had to navigate a labyrinth of regional tolls and potential banditry. Imagine caravans laden with coffee, gold, and ivory, once moving freely under imperial protection, now having to pay tribute to a dozen different lords along their journey, each demanding their share. This economic disruption further weakened any nascent attempts at centralized recovery. Historians still debate the precise starting point of the Zemene Mesafint. Some scholars pinpoint it to the deposition of Emperor Eowas I in 1769, an event orchestrated by Ras Mikael Sahul of Tigray. Ras Mikael, a formidable and ruthless figure, had grown tired of Eowas's perceived favoritism towards his Oromo relatives and his attempts to assert greater independence. By having Eowas murdered, Mikael effectively demonstrated that the emperor was no longer sacrosanct and that real power lay with the regional strongmen who could command armies and dictate terms. Others argue for a more gradual onset, seeing the period as a culmination of earlier trends, such as the decline of royal revenues and the increasing autonomy of provincial governors. Regardless of the exact starting date, the era was undeniably characterized by a profound weakening of the imperial center and a corresponding rise of regional military strongmen. One of the lesser-known aspects of this period is the role of religious schism. While the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church remained a unifying force in theory, it too was not immune to the fragmentation of the era. Theological disputes, particularly regarding the nature of Christ, became intertwined with political rivalries. Different regional lords often championed different theological interpretations, using them as a means to solidify their power and differentiate themselves from their rivals. For instance, the Sost Lidit, three births doctrine, popular in Tigray, contrasted with other interpretations, leading to theological councils that were often more about political maneuvering than spiritual consensus. These religious divisions further deepened the fault lines between regions, making the prospect of a unified empire even more remote. The Mesafint were not merely warlords, many were also patrons of the arts and learning within their own domains, albeit on a smaller scale than the imperial court of Gondar had once been. While the grand imperial building projects largely ceased, regional churches and monasteries continued to be constructed and decorated, often reflecting the unique artistic styles of their specific regions. Manuscripts were still copied and illuminated, though perhaps with less uniformity than before. This suggests that even amidst the political turmoil, a deep cultural and spiritual continuity persisted, a quiet resilience that kept the flame of Ethiopian identity flickering, even as its political structure fractured. Perhaps these scattered centers of learning and devotion were like islands in a stormy sea, preserving the cultural heritage until a time of greater stability could emerge. The constant state of warfare and shifting allegiances had a profound impact on the common people. Life became more precarious. Farmers faced the constant threat of their crops being seized by passing armies, or their villages being raided. Trade, as mentioned, was disrupted, leading to economic hardship and scarcity in many areas. Yet, remarkably, the core institutions of Ethiopian society, the church, the legal system based on the Fetha Negest, law of the kings, and the communal village structures, largely endured. They provided a framework of stability in a world that was otherwise in constant flux, a testament to the deep roots of these traditions. The resilience of these foundational elements allowed Ethiopian society to weather the storm of the Zemene Mesafint without completely dissolving into anarchy. The power of the Yeju Oromo rulers, often referred to as the Warishe dynasty, reached its zenith in the early 19th century. Figures like Ras Gugsa and his son Ras Ali II held immense sway, effectively ruling the empire from their stronghold in Debre Tabor rather than Gondar. They maintained the Solomonic emperors on the throne, but these emperors were often confined to the palace, their authority purely ceremonial. Ras Ali II, for instance, despite being an Oromo, was a shrewd politician who understood the importance of maintaining the facade of Solomonic legitimacy. He navigated the treacherous waters of regional rivalries, often playing one Mesafint against another, to maintain his own supremacy. His court in Debre Tabor became a new center of power, attracting regional dignitaries and foreign envoys, much as Gondar once had. However, even within this era of decentralization, there was a simmering desire for unity. Many regional leaders, despite their rivalries, recognized the long-term dangers of continued fragmentation. The idea of a unified Christian empire, a bulwark against external threats and a guarantor of internal peace, remained a powerful ideal. This underlying sentiment would eventually pave the way for the emergence of a new force, a figure who would challenge the established order of the Mesafint and seek to restore the lost glory of the Solomonic Empire. But before that could happen, the Zemene Mesafint had to run its course, its chaotic energies exhausting themselves until the time was ripe for a transformative change. The land, though fractured, held within it the seeds of its own reunification, waiting for the right moment to sprout. The Zemene Mesafint was not a period of stagnation, despite its political turmoil. It was a time of significant cultural exchange, particularly with the Oromo. While often seen as a period of decline, it also saw the integration of new cultural elements, military tactics, and administrative practices. The very struggle for power often led to innovation, as regional lords sought new ways to strengthen their armies, manage their territories, and secure resources. This dynamic interplay, though often violent, prevented the society from becoming entirely ossified. It was a crucible, forging new identities and new ways of governance that would eventually contribute to the shape of the modern Ethiopian state. The echoes of these regional power struggles would resonate for generations, shaping political alliances and cultural identities long after the era itself had passed into history. The constant need for military strength meant that armies became more professionalized, albeit on a regional scale. Soldiers were often drawn from specific warrior classes or were mercenaries, loyal to the Mesafint who paid and fed them. This reliance on personal armies, rather than a centralized imperial force, further entrenched the power of the regional lords and made it difficult for any single emperor to reassert control. The imperial army, once a formidable force, had largely dissolved into these regional contingents. This military fragmentation mirrored the political and administrative fragmentation, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of decentralized power. The end of the Zemene Mesafint is generally marked by the rise of Emperor Tewodros II in 1855. Tewodros, originally named Kasa Haile, was a charismatic and ambitious figure from Kwara, a region on the western fringes of the empire. He was not of the traditional Solomonic lineage, nor was he a member of one of the established Mesafint families. Instead, he rose through sheer military prowess and strategic acumen, consolidating power by systematically defeating the various regional lords who had dominated the era. His victory over Ras Ali II in the Battle of Aishal in 1853 was a decisive turning point, effectively ending the Yeju Oromo's dominance. Tewodros then spent the next 2 years campaigning tirelessly, bringing the disparate regions under his control and culminating in his coronation as emperor in 1855. His reign, though ultimately tragic, marked a profound shift. Tewodros's ambition was to restore the glory of the Solomonic Empire, to centralize power, modernize the army, and end the fragmentation that had plagued Ethiopia for nearly a century. He saw himself as a divinely appointed unifier, tasked with bringing peace and stability back to the land. His rise signaled the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see Ethiopia grapple with the challenges of modernization and renewed engagement with the outside world, but always with the memory of the Zemene Mesafint, its lessons of fragmentation and the enduring desire for unity etched into its collective consciousness. The long, winding road from a decentralized election of principalities to a unified empire was fraught with challenges, but the seeds of that unification were undeniably sown in the very struggles of the era of princes. The whispers of a new dawn stirred across the Ethiopian highlands, carried on winds that had long known the scent of ancient earth, and the echoes of forgotten empires. The fragmented realms, once bound by shared faith and a distant imperial memory, now yearned for a unifying hand. From this yearning emerged a figure of immense ambition and fierce determination, Kasa Haile, who would ascend to the throne as Tewodros II. Born in the early 19th century, around 1818 in Kwara, a province west of Lake Tana, Tewodros was not of the traditional Solomonic lineage, a fact that would both fuel his drive and contribute to his tragic end. He rose through the ranks as a shrewd military commander, first as a shifta, a kind of bandit or rebel who gained popular support by challenging the entrenched regional lords. His charisma and military prowess allowed him to systematically defeat the various warring princes and chieftains who had carved Ethiopia into a patchwork of independent fiefdoms during the Zemene Mesafint, the era of princes. By 1855, Tewodros had consolidated his power, culminating in his coronation as Emperor of Ethiopia. His vision was grand, to restore the glory of the Solomonic Empire, to unify the diverse peoples under a single, strong central government, and to modernize his ancient land. He understood that the world beyond Ethiopia's borders was changing rapidly, driven by industrialization and the relentless expansion of European powers. To resist this encroaching tide, Ethiopia needed a powerful, disciplined army equipped with modern weaponry. Tewodros established the first national standing army, a revolutionary concept in a land accustomed to feudal levies. He sought to end the internal conflicts that had plagued the country for centuries, curbing the power of regional nobles and the clergy, often confiscating church lands to fund his reforms. He even attempted to abolish the slave trade, a practice deeply ingrained in the social fabric of the time, though his efforts met with significant resistance. His dream of modernization extended to infrastructure. He envisioned roads, bridges, and even a munitions factory to produce cannons and firearms, freeing Ethiopia from reliance on foreign suppliers. At Gafat, near his capital of Debre Tabor, he employed European artisans and missionaries, not only for their spiritual guidance, but more critically for their technical expertise. These foreign craftsmen, often working under duress, managed to cast several cannons, including a massive one known as Sebastopol, a testament to Tewodros's unwavering belief in self-sufficiency. Yet his methods were often harsh, driven by an impatient zeal that bordered on tyranny. He alienated many who initially supported him, including the powerful clergy, through his land reforms and his attempts to control the church. His desire for European assistance in his modernization efforts led him to appeal to Queen Victoria of Britain, seeking military engineers and artisans. However, his letters went unanswered for an unconscionably long time, a diplomatic slight that deeply wounded his pride and fueled his growing paranoia. In a move that would prove to be his undoing, Tewodros imprisoned the British consul, Charles Duncan Cameron, and several European missionaries and craftsmen, along with their families, in 1864. He saw them as hostages, leveraged to force Britain's attention and secure the technical aid he so desperately craved. This act, born of frustration and a profound misunderstanding of European diplomatic norms, triggered a punitive British military expedition. Led by Sir Robert Napier, a force of some 32,000 men, including Indian sepoys, landed at Annesley Bay in 1867 and marched over 400 miles through rugged terrain to Tewodros's mountain fortress of Magdala. The British campaign was a logistical marvel, employing elephants and an impressive supply chain. On April 10, 1868, the Battle of Magdala commenced. Tewodros with a significant incident. Figment's smaller and less well-equipped force fought bravely but was ultimately overwhelmed. Rather than surrender to the British, he chose to take his own life with a pistol gifted to him by Queen Victoria, a poignant and tragic end to a reign that began with such promise. His death marked the end of an era, but his vision of a unified modern Ethiopia would inspire those who followed. The vacuum left by Tewodros's death was quickly filled by another powerful figure, Kassa Mercha, who would become Emperor Johannes IV. Crowned in 1872, Johannes was a devout and conservative ruler, deeply committed to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Unlike Tewodros, who sought radical change, Johannes prioritized maintaining the religious and cultural traditions of the empire, while still recognizing the need for military strength to counter external threats. His reign was largely defined by continuous warfare against encroaching foreign powers. He faced Egyptian expansionism from the north, particularly under Khedive Ismail Pasha, who harbored ambitions of creating a vast Nile empire. Johannes decisively defeated the Egyptians in two major battles, Gundet in 1875 and Gura in 1876. These victories were crucial, not only in preserving Ethiopia's independence, but also in establishing Johannes's military prowess and solidifying his claim to the throne. However, the greatest threat to Ethiopia's sovereignty came from European colonial powers. The Italians, having established a foothold in Eritrea, began to push inland, seeking to expand their colonial empire. Yohannes also contended with the Mahdist uprising in Sudan, a militant Islamic movement that posed a significant threat to Ethiopia's western borders. He was a skilled diplomat, often playing European powers against each other. But the sheer pressure from multiple fronts was immense. In a strategic move to consolidate his power and secure the succession, Yohannes recognized Menelik, the king of Shewa, as his heir, despite Menelik's initial reluctance and occasional rebellions. This decision, enshrined in the Treaty of Borumeda in 1878, was a pragmatic attempt to prevent another period of internal strife after his death. Yohannes's reign ended tragically in 1889 during the Battle of Metemmah against the Mahdist forces. He was mortally wounded, dying on the battlefield. His death, like Tewodros's, left a void, but his legacy of fierce resistance against foreign aggression and his efforts to maintain the empire's religious identity were profound. It was during this turbulent period that the mantle of leadership passed to Menelik II, a figure whose reign would define modern Ethiopia and secure its place as the only African nation to successfully resist European colonization. Menelik II, born Saleh Mariam in 1844, was a descendant of the Solomonic dynasty through the Shewan line. He had initially been a rival to Yohannes IV, ruling the autonomous kingdom of Shewa. However, after Yohannes's death, Menelik swiftly consolidated his power, leveraging his strong base in Shewa and his diplomatic acumen. He was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia in 1889. Menelik was a pragmatist and a visionary, combining traditional Ethiopian statecraft with a keen understanding of global politics and technology. He understood the European powers' insatiable appetite for territory, but also recognized their technological superiority. His strategy was multifaceted: to expand and unify the empire internally, to modernize the army, and to engage in shrewd diplomacy. Internally, Menelik embarked on a campaign of territorial expansion, bringing vast new regions under imperial control. He incorporated territories to the south and east, including regions inhabited by the Oromo, Sidama, and Somali peoples, effectively doubling the size of the empire. This expansion, often achieved through military conquest, was crucial for consolidating resources and manpower, strengthening Ethiopia's position against external threats. He established new administrative centers, appointed governors, and began the process of integrating these diverse populations into a unified state. His approach to modernization was far more successful than Tewodros's. He did not alienate the powerful regional lords or the church in the same way, preferring a more gradual and collaborative approach. Menelik's most significant achievement, however, was his successful resistance to European colonization. The Italians, believing they had secured a protectorate over Ethiopia through the Treaty of Wuchale, or Uchiali, in 1889, found themselves in a diplomatic quagmire. The treaty, written in both Amharic and Italian, contained a crucial discrepancy. The Italian version stated that Ethiopia was obliged to conduct its foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making it a protectorate. The Amharic version, however, stated that Ethiopia could choose to use Italian good offices, implying a choice, not an obligation. Menelik, upon realizing the Italian interpretation, vehemently denounced it, declaring the Italian version a violation of Ethiopia's sovereignty. This dispute escalated into war. Menelik, anticipating the conflict, had spent years acquiring modern weaponry from various European sources, including Russia and France, often playing one power against another to secure arms. He meticulously built up a well-equipped and disciplined army. In 1895, Italy launched a full-scale invasion of Ethiopia. Menelik, demonstrating remarkable leadership, rallied the regional nobility and their forces, including his formidable wife, Empress Tetu Batul, who commanded her own contingent and played a crucial role in military strategy. The climax came on March 1, 1896, at the Battle of Adwa. It was a decisive victory for Ethiopia. A stunning defeat for a European colonial power at the hands of an African army. The Battle of Adwa sent shockwaves across the globe, shattering the myth of European invincibility and inspiring anti-colonial movements worldwide. It secured Ethiopia's independence, making it the only African nation to successfully resist colonization during the scramble for Africa. Beyond military and diplomatic triumphs, Menelik II was a true modernizer. He established the first modern hospital, introduced the postal service, and began constructing the first railway line from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, his newly founded capital. He introduced the telephone and telegraph, connecting Ethiopia to the wider world. He even introduced the first motor car, a truly astonishing sight in late 19th century Ethiopia. He encouraged education, though formal schooling remained limited. Historians still debate the extent to which these modernizations truly transformed Ethiopian society beyond the elite. Was it a top-down imposition or a genuine societal shift? Regardless, his efforts laid the groundwork for a more centralized and modern state. Menelik's reign also saw the establishment of Addis Ababa as the permanent capital. Founded in 1886, its name, meaning new flower, symbolized a fresh beginning. The city grew rapidly, becoming a hub of commerce and administration. He oversaw the construction of palaces, churches, and government buildings, shaping the urban landscape. His approach to governance was more centralized than his predecessors, but he still relied on the cooperation of powerful regional nobles, often through strategic marriages and alliances. He navigated the complex web of internal politics and external pressures with remarkable skill. The legacy of Tawadros II, Johannes IV, and Menelik II is intertwined. Tawadros, the audacious visionary, shattered the Zemene Mesafint and ignited the spark of unification and modernization, though his reign ended in tragedy. Johannes, the staunch defender of faith and territory, consolidated the empire and fended off multiple invasions, laying the groundwork for Menelik's ultimate triumph. And Menelik, the shrewd diplomat, military genius, and pragmatic modernizer, secured Ethiopia's independence and propelled it into the 20th century as a sovereign nation. These emperors, each in their own way, shaped the destiny of Ethiopia, resisting the relentless tide of colonialism and forging a unified state from fragmented kingdoms. Their efforts ensured that Ethiopia, alone among African nations, would retain its ancient sovereignty, a beacon of independence in a continent consumed by imperial ambitions. Perhaps the ancient stones of Magdala and Adwa still whisper tales of their courage and resilience, reminding the stars of a nation that refused to yield. The gentle rhythm of life in the Ethiopian highlands, so long undisturbed by the grand machinations of European powers, was about to be irrevocably altered. The year was 1935, and the world watched as a new aggressive force flexed its muscles on the global stage: Fascist Italy. Benito Mussolini, dreaming of a resurrected Roman Empire, cast his gaze upon Ethiopia, one of the last independent nations in Africa. Seeing it not only as a strategic prize, but as a symbol of his imperial ambitions, The pretext for invasion was flimsy, a border dispute at the Walwal Oasis in December 1934. But the true motive was clear: conquest. Emperor Haile Selassie I, a man of profound foresight and unwavering dedication to his people, understood the gravity of the threat. He had tirelessly worked to modernize Ethiopia, to bring it into the League of Nations, and to secure its place among sovereign nations. Now he faced an adversary armed with tanks, airplanes, and poison gas, weapons Ethiopia, with its largely traditional army, could scarcely imagine, let alone counter. The disparity in military technology was immense, a chasm between spears and biplanes, between cavalry charges and mechanized infantry. On October 3, 1935, without a formal declaration of war, Italian forces poured across the Eritrean border, beginning the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. The invasion was brutal and swift. Italian air superiority was absolute, their planes bombing towns and villages, striking fear into the hearts of civilians. Reports of mustard gas attacks, a horrific weapon banned by international conventions, soon emerged, painting a grim picture of the conflict. Haile Selassie appealed to the League of Nations, pleading for intervention, reminding the world of its collective responsibility to protect smaller nations from aggression. His eloquent, impassioned speech at the League's assembly in Geneva in June 1936 remains a powerful testament to his resolve, a cry for justice that echoed across the globe. He warned that if Ethiopia's plight was ignored, the world would soon face a similar fate. Yet the international community, still reeling from the Great Depression and hesitant to confront Mussolini, offered little more than condemnations and ineffective sanctions. The policy of appeasement, born of a desperate hope to avoid another devastating European war, left Ethiopia isolated. Despite their bravery and fierce determination, the Ethiopian forces were overwhelmed. The Battle of Mechu in March 1936, a desperate last stand by the emperor's army, saw thousands of Ethiopians fall before the relentless Italian advance. On May 5, 1936, Italian troops marched into Addis Ababa, and Emperor Haile Selassie was forced into exile, seeking refuge in Britain. Italy officially annexed Ethiopia, merging it with Eritrea and Italian Somaliland to form the Italian East Africa. For the first time in its long history, the ancient empire of Ethiopia had fallen under foreign occupation. The silence that descended upon the capital was heavy, a stark contrast to the vibrant life that had pulsed through its streets for centuries. The occupiers sought to impose their will, their language, their infrastructure, and their vision of a modern colonial state. Roads were built, buildings erected, and a new administrative system put in place, all designed to cement Italian control. However, the spirit of Ethiopia was not easily broken. Even as the Italian flag flew over the Grand Palace, resistance movements began to coalesce across the vast, rugged landscape. These were the Arbegnok, the Patriots, a diverse collection of former soldiers, local chiefs, farmers, and even ordinary citizens who refused to accept foreign rule. Their struggle was often uncoordinated, driven by local grievances and fiercely independent spirits. But their shared goal was the expulsion of the invaders and the restoration of their nation's sovereignty. The resistance was not a single, unified movement, but a mosaic of localized uprisings. In the north, figures like Ras Imru Haile Selassie, a cousin of the emperor, initially led organized forces before being captured. Yet new leaders emerged from the shadows. Abebe Aragai in Shewa, who became one of the most prominent and effective guerrilla commanders. His name whispered with both fear by the Italians and reverence by the Ethiopians, or Bele Zeleke in Gojam, whose daring raids and intimate knowledge of the terrain made him a formidable adversary. These resistance fighters operated in small, agile units, launching hit-and-run attacks, ambushing Italian convoys, and disrupting their supply lines. They used the mountainous terrain to their advantage, vanishing into the mist-shrouded peaks and deep gorges, only to reappear where least expected. The Italian occupation, though brief, was marked by significant brutality. Retaliation for resistance activities was often swift and merciless, with mass executions and the destruction of villages becoming a grim reality. One particularly dark chapter was the massacre of Addis Ababa in February 1937, following an assassination attempt on Viceroy Rodolfo Graziani. Thousands of Ethiopians, many of them innocent civilians, were rounded up and killed in a horrific 3-day spree of violence. This act, and others like it, only served to harden the resolve of the patriots, fueling their determination to fight for their freedom. The debate among historians about the true extent of Italian control is fascinating. While Italy certainly controlled the major cities and main communication routes, their grip on the vast rural areas, especially the more remote and mountainous regions, remained tenuous. The Arbognoch constantly challenged their authority, making it impossible for the Italians to truly pacify the country. Some scholars argue that the Italian occupation was more of a military presence in key strategic locations rather than a deep, pervasive administrative control over the entire territory. Others point to the significant infrastructure projects undertaken by the Italians, such as the construction of thousands of kilometers of roads, as evidence of their intent to establish a lasting colonial presence. Yet, even these roads, intended to facilitate control, often became targets for the resistance, their construction a source of forced labor, further fueling resentment. As the late 1930s drew to a close, the winds of war began to blow across Europe once more. Haile Selassie, from his exile, continued to advocate for his country, never losing faith that Ethiopia would one day be free. His appeals gained new urgency as the world plunged into World War II. When Italy joined the Axis powers in June 1940, Britain, now fighting for its very survival, found a strategic ally in the Ethiopian resistance. The liberation of Ethiopia became not just a moral imperative, but a military necessity, a way to weaken the Axis and secure vital routes. In 1941, British and Commonwealth forces, alongside Ethiopian patriots, launched a coordinated campaign to liberate Ethiopia. This was the East African Campaign. Haile Selassie himself returned to Africa, landing in Sudan and then crossing into Ethiopia, a beacon of hope for his people. The sight of their emperor walking among them rekindled the flames of resistance. The patriots, now receiving some British support and coordination, intensified their attacks, pinning down Italian forces and aiding the Allied advance. The fighting was fierce, but the tide had turned. The Italian forces, stretched thin and cut off from supplies, began to crumble. On April 6, 1941, Haile Selassie re-entered Addis Ababa, a moment of profound triumph and emotional resonance. The streets, which had been silent under occupation, now erupted in joyous celebration. The Italian occupation, which had lasted just 5 years, was over. The formal restoration of Ethiopia's independence followed, though the path was not without its complexities. A provisional agreement with Britain in 1942, and then a more comprehensive Anglo-Ethiopian agreement in 1944, gradually re-established Ethiopia's full sovereignty. Haile Selassie, once again on his throne, faced the daunting task of rebuilding a nation scarred by war and occupation. He had to reassert central authority, integrate the diverse resistance groups, and address the lingering effects of the conflict. The Ethiopian experience during the Italian occupation and subsequent liberation stands as a unique chapter in the history of decolonization. It was a testament to the resilience of a people who refused to surrender their ancient heritage and independence. Perhaps these mountains, which had witnessed so much history, had whispered stories of freedom to the wind, inspiring the Arbignok to fight against overwhelming odds. The struggle, though often overlooked in the broader narrative of World War II, was a crucial early victory against fascism, demonstrating that even a technologically superior aggressor could be defeated by determined resistance and international solidarity. Ethiopia's independence, hard-won and fiercely defended, served as an inspiration for other African nations still under colonial rule, a powerful reminder that freedom, once tasted, could never truly be extinguished. The scars of the occupation remained, but the spirit of Ethiopia, ancient and unyielding, had prevailed. The dawn of the 20th century in Ethiopia was not merely a new calendar page turning. It was the unfolding of a new era, one that would see the ancient Solomonic dynasty reach its zenith and then, tragically, its end. At the heart of this transformative period stood Tafari Makonnen, a young man of noble birth, whose destiny was inextricably linked with that of his nation. Born in 1892, a mere 6 years before the Battle of Adwa, Tafari was a grandnephew of Emperor Menelik II, and his lineage placed him firmly within the imperial fold. His early life was marked by a keen intellect and a deep awareness of Ethiopia's unique position in a rapidly changing world. He observed the slow, deliberate pace of Menelik's reforms, the cautious embrace of modernity, and the fierce independence that defined the Ethiopian spirit. When Empress Zewditu, Menelik's daughter, ascended the throne in 1916, Tafari Makonnen was appointed regent and heir apparent. This was a pivotal moment. For though Zewditu held the imperial title, it was Tafari, with his progressive vision, who began to steer the ship of state. His regency was characterized by a push for modernization that was both ambitious and fraught with challenges. He understood that for Ethiopia to truly thrive and maintain its sovereignty in an age of European colonial expansion, it needed to engage with the wider world, not just resist it. One of his most significant early achievements was Ethiopia's entry into the League of Nations in 1923. This act was more than a diplomatic formality. It was a powerful statement to the world that Ethiopia was a sovereign nation, deserving of respect and recognition on the global stage. It also provided a platform for Ethiopia to advocate for its interests and, crucially, to seek collective security against potential aggression. Tafari's vision extended far beyond international diplomacy. He embarked on a series of internal reforms aimed at strengthening the central government and modernizing key institutions. He began to dismantle the feudal system that had long characterized Ethiopian society, seeking to centralize power and reduce the autonomy of regional lords. This was a delicate balancing act, as these traditional power structures were deeply entrenched. He introduced a modern legal code, established a nascent police force, and began to build a more professional army, moving away from the traditional levy system. Education was another cornerstone of his reform agenda. He opened new schools, including the Tafari Makonnen School in Addis Ababa, which taught a Western curriculum, and sent promising young Ethiopians abroad for further studies. He believed that an educated populace was essential for the nation's progress. In 1930, following the death of Empress Zewditu, Tafari Makonnen was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie I, meaning power of the Trinity. His coronation was a grand affair, attended by dignitaries from around the world, signaling Ethiopia's growing prominence. His reign as emperor intensified his modernization efforts. He oversaw the drafting of Ethiopia's first written constitution in 1931, which, while granting significant power to the emperor, also laid the groundwork for a more structured and modern government. He invested in infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and telegraph lines, slowly weaving the disparate regions of the empire into a more cohesive whole. He also encouraged the development of a national currency and a central bank, aiming to stabilize the economy. However, Haile Selassie's reign was soon overshadowed by a looming threat from the north. Fascist Italy, under Benito Mussolini, harbored ambitions of colonial expansion and viewed Ethiopia as a prime target. Italy had long held a grudge since its defeat at Adwa, and Mussolini saw an opportunity to avenge that humiliation and establish a new Roman Empire in Africa. Despite Ethiopia's membership in the League of Nations and Haile Selassie's impassioned pleas for international intervention, the world largely stood by. Historians still debate the extent to which the League of Nations' failure to act decisively against Italy's aggression contributed to the weakening of the League itself and the subsequent outbreak of World War II. Some argue that it exposed the League's inherent weaknesses and the unwillingness of major powers to prioritize collective security over their own national interests. On October 3, 1935, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia from Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. The Second Italo-Ethiopian War had begun. Ethiopia, with its largely traditional army, was no match for Italy's modern military might, which included tanks, aircraft, and, tragically, chemical weapons. Haile Selassie personally led his troops, demonstrating remarkable courage, but the technological disparity was too great. The world watched in horror, yet did little. Haile Selassie's moving address to the League of Nations in Geneva in June 1936, where he declared, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow," remains one of the most poignant speeches in history, a stark warning that went unheeded. In May 1936, Haile Selassie was forced into exile, seeking refuge in Britain. Italy formally annexed Ethiopia, declaring it part of Italian East Africa. This period of occupation, though relatively brief, was brutal. The Italians sought to erase Ethiopian identity, suppressing the Amharic language, destroying churches, and massacring large numbers of the population. Yet the Ethiopian spirit of resistance never truly died. Guerrilla warfare continued in the countryside, led by patriots who refused to surrender. The tide began to turn with the outbreak of World War II. As Italy allied with Nazi Germany, Ethiopia's plight became intertwined with the larger global conflict. With the support of British and Commonwealth forces, Haile Selassie returned to his homeland in 1941, leading the liberation effort. His triumphant re-entry into Addis Ababa in May 1941, exactly 5 years after his forced departure, was a moment of immense national pride and a testament to his resilience. The post-war years saw Haile Selassie resume his efforts to modernize and rebuild Ethiopia. He expanded the education system further, establishing Haile Selassie I University, now Addis Ababa University, in 1950, a significant step in higher education. He continued to centralize power, further diminishing the influence of regional feudal lords. Ethiopia played an increasingly active role on the international stage, becoming a founding member of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963, headquartered in Addis Ababa. Haile Selassie became a revered figure on the continent. Seen as a symbol of African independence and dignity, his advocacy for Pan-Africanism and his efforts to mediate conflicts between newly independent African nations earned him widespread respect. Despite these achievements, the latter part of Haile Selassie's reign was marked by growing internal dissent and a widening gap between the imperial court and the aspirations of the populace. While he brought Ethiopia into the modern world, the pace of change was often slow, and the benefits of modernization did not reach all segments of society equally. The land tenure system remained largely unchanged, leaving many peasants impoverished and landless. The centralized government, while efficient in some ways, also became increasingly autocratic, stifling political dissent. A lesser-known detail from this period is the emperor's deep personal interest in the development of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. He meticulously oversaw the construction and renovation of numerous churches, including the impressive Holy Trinity Cathedral in Addis Ababa, where he would eventually be laid to rest. He also played a crucial role in strengthening the church's autonomy from the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, a long-held aspiration for the Ethiopian clergy. The 1960s and early 1970s witnessed a series of challenges that began to erode the emperor's authority. Famines, particularly the devastating Wollo famine of 1973, exposed the government's inability to adequately respond to the needs of its people. The images of starving Ethiopians, contrasted with the perceived opulence of the imperial court, fueled public anger. Economic stagnation, rising unemployment, and a sense of political stagnation further exacerbated the discontent. Student protests, labor strikes, and military unrest became increasingly common. The young, educated elite, many of whom had been sent abroad by Haile Selassie himself, returned with ideas of democracy and social justice that clashed with the existing imperial system. The emperor, by then in his early 80s, seemed increasingly out of touch with the changing times. His government struggled to address the mounting crises. The military, once a pillar of his power, began to fracture. In early 1974, a series of mutinies and protests escalated into a full-blown revolution. The Derg, a committee of lower-ranking military officers, gradually seized power, dismantling the imperial government piece by piece. On September 12, 1974, Emperor Haile Selassie I was formally deposed. The Lion of Judah, the last Solomonic emperor, was removed from his palace and placed under house arrest. His long and eventful reign, spanning nearly 6 decades, had come to an abrupt and ignominious end. The circumstances of his death in August 1975 remain shrouded in mystery. While the Derg announced that he had died of natural causes, many believe he was murdered. Perhaps the walls of his palace, once echoing with the pronouncements of an emperor, now whispered only the secrets of his final days. The downfall of Haile Selassie marked the end of an imperial lineage that stretched back millennia, tracing its roots to the legendary Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. It was a dramatic culmination of a long process of modernization that had paradoxically sown the seeds of its own destruction. The emperor's efforts to bring Ethiopia into the modern world created new social classes, new aspirations, and new grievances that the ancient imperial system ultimately could not contain. The revolution that deposed him ushered in a period of intense political upheaval, marked by military rule, socialist experimentation, and widespread human rights abuses, a stark contrast to the gentle, reflective atmosphere that had often characterized the early years of his reign. The fall of the emperor was not just the end of a dynasty. It was the closing of an entire chapter in Ethiopia's long and complex history, opening the door to an uncertain and often turbulent future. The ancient threads of imperial Ethiopia, woven through millennia, began to fray visibly in the mid-20th century. Emperor Haile Selassie I, once a beacon of African independence, found his long reign increasingly challenged by a confluence of internal pressures and global shifts. The 1970s brought devastating famines, particularly in the Wallo and Tigray regions, exposing deep-seated inequalities and the government's perceived inability to respond effectively. Images of starvation, broadcast internationally, eroded the last vestiges of the emperor's divine right and public trust. Economic stagnation, coupled with widespread corruption and an entrenched feudal system, fueled growing discontent among students, intellectuals, and the military. The armed forces, once a pillar of imperial authority, began to question their loyalty. In 1974, a series of cascading events culminated in the emperor's overthrow. A general strike, mutinies within the military, and widespread demonstrations paralyzed the country. A committee of low-ranking military officers, known as the Derg, or Committee in Amharic, gradually consolidated power. On September 12, 1974, Haile Selassie was formally deposed, marking the end of the Solomonic dynasty that had, by tradition, ruled Ethiopia for nearly 3 millennia. This was a moment of profound rupture, severing a continuous line of monarchy that stretched back to the legendary Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. The initial promise of the Derg was reform and a more equitable society, but this quickly dissolved into a brutal military dictatorship. The Derg, initially a collective leadership, soon saw its power concentrated in the hands of Lieutenant Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam. He emerged as the dominant figure, orchestrating a swift and violent purge of his rivals within the Derg and anyone perceived as a threat to the revolution. This period, from 1975 to 1977, became known as the Red Terror. Thousands of suspected opponents, monarchists, intellectuals, students, and members of rival political factions, were arrested, tortured, and executed without trial. The streets of Addis Ababa, once bustling with daily life, became places of fear, with bodies often left as grim warnings. Estimates of those killed during the Red Terror vary widely, with some human rights organizations suggesting tens of thousands, while others place the number much higher. This dark chapter profoundly scarred Ethiopian society, leaving a legacy of trauma and mistrust that lingered for decades. Under Mengistu, Ethiopia officially adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology, aligning itself with the Soviet Union and its allies. Land reform was a central tenet of the Derg's policy, aiming to dismantle the feudal system that had concentrated land ownership in the hands of a few. While initially popular among the peasantry, the implementation was often chaotic and coercive, disrupting traditional farming practices and sometimes leading to decreased agricultural output. Collective farms were established, and private enterprise was largely suppressed. The Derg also embarked on ambitious literacy campaigns and public health initiatives, which did see some initial successes in expanding access to education and basic medical care. However, these gains were often overshadowed by the regime's repressive nature and its relentless focus on militarization. The 1980s proved to be an exceptionally challenging decade for Ethiopia. The country became embroiled in a protracted civil war as various ethno-nationalist and anti-Derg rebel groups emerged, particularly in Eritrea and Tigray. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, were among the most prominent, fighting for self-determination and the overthrow of the Mengistu regime. The Ogaden War with Somalia in 1977 to 78, though a victory for Ethiopia with Soviet and Cuban support, further drained the country's resources and solidified its military focus. Adding to the devastation, the mid-1980s saw another catastrophic famine, exacerbated by drought, internal conflict, and the Derg's disastrous agricultural policies, including forced collectivization and resettlement programs. International aid poured in, but distribution was often hampered by the ongoing civil war and the regime's priorities. The images of starving children from this period became iconic globally, prompting a massive humanitarian response, including the Live Aid concerts. Yet historians still debate the precise extent to which the famine was a natural disaster versus a man-made catastrophe, with many arguing that the Derg's policies and its use of food as a weapon against rebel-held areas significantly worsened the crisis. The regime's forced resettlement programs, moving millions from the drought-prone north to the more fertile south, were particularly controversial, leading to widespread death and suffering. By the late 1980s, the Derg's grip on power began to weaken. The collapse of the Soviet Union, its primary patron, deprived the regime of crucial military and economic support. The rebel groups, particularly the TPLF, which had formed the core of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front (EPRDF) coalition, gained significant ground. After years of brutal fighting, the EPRDF forces advanced on Addis Ababa. In May 1991, Mengistu Haile Mariam fled the country, seeking asylum in Zimbabwe, bringing an end to 17 years of Derg rule. The EPRDF marched into the capital, marking a new chapter in Ethiopia's tumultuous history. The post-Derg era began with a transitional government led by the EPRDF, with Meles Zenawi, the TPLF leader, at its helm. One of the most significant and immediate changes was the independence of Eritrea. After a referendum in 1993, Eritrea formally seceded from Ethiopia, concluding a 30-year war for independence. This moment, while celebrated by Eritreans, was complex for Ethiopia, as it lost its direct access to the sea, a strategic and economic blow. The new Ethiopian government embarked on a path of ethnic federalism, dividing the country into ethnically based regional states, a move intended to address historical grievances and promote self-determination among Ethiopia's diverse ethnic groups. This system, enshrined in the 1995 Constitution, aimed to decentralize power and prevent the dominance of any single ethnic group. However, it also sparked concerns about potential ethnic fragmentation and increased inter-ethnic tensions. Economically, the EPRDF government shifted away from the Derg's socialist policies, embracing market-oriented reforms. Privatization of state-owned enterprises began, and efforts were made to attract foreign investment. Despite these reforms, the state continued to play a significant role in key sectors, often referred to as a developmental state model. Ethiopia saw impressive economic growth in the 2000s and 2010s, with significant investments in infrastructure, including roads, railways, and hydroelectric dams, most notably the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam (GERD) on the Blue Nile, a project of immense national pride, but also regional controversy with Egypt and Sudan. Poverty rates declined, and access to education and healthcare improved for many. However, the political landscape remained complex. While multi-party elections were introduced, the EPRDF, dominated by the TPLF, maintained a tight grip on power, often winning elections by overwhelming majorities that raised questions about democratic space and fairness. Opposition parties struggled to gain traction, and political dissent was often suppressed. Human rights organizations frequently raised concerns about restrictions on freedom of expression, assembly, and the detention of political opponents. The federal system, while designed to empower ethnic groups, also sometimes exacerbated ethnic rivalries and conflicts, particularly over land and resources. A significant challenge emerged in 1998, when a border dispute between Ethiopia and Eritrea escalated into a full-scale war. The two former allies, who had fought side by side against the Derg, engaged in a devastating conflict that lasted until 2000, resulting in tens of thousands of casualties on both sides and further straining the region. Despite a peace agreement, relations remained tense and hostile for nearly 2 decades, with the border effectively closed and no diplomatic ties. This unresolved conflict cast a long shadow over both nations, diverting resources and hindering regional integration. In 2018, a pivotal moment arrived with the appointment of Abiy Ahmed as Prime Minister. Abiy, from the Oromo ethnic group, the largest in Ethiopia, came to power following years of widespread anti-government protests, particularly among the Oromo and Amhara communities, who felt marginalized by the TPLF-dominated EPRDF. His rise signaled a desire for significant change. Abiy immediately embarked on a series of sweeping reforms, releasing political prisoners, unbanning opposition parties, opening up media space, and moving to privatize key state-owned industries like Ethio Telecom. Most notably, he made a historic peace overture to Eritrea, leading to the signing of a peace agreement in July 2018, which earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. This rapprochement brought an end to the no-war, no-peace stalemate that had defined the relationship for 2 decades. However, Abiy's reforms, while welcomed by many, also unleashed long-suppressed ethnic and regional tensions. The swift dismantling of the old political order created a power vacuum, and conflicts erupted in various parts of the country. The transition was fraught with challenges, and the federal system came under increasing strain. The most significant challenge to Abiy's government emerged in late 2020, when tensions between the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, which had been increasingly sidelined in the new political landscape, escalated into a full-scale armed conflict in the Tigray region. This conflict led to a severe humanitarian crisis, widespread displacement, and significant loss of life, further complicating Ethiopia's path toward stability and prosperity. The war underscored the deep-seated political and ethnic divisions that continued to shape the nation, even as it strove to build a modern identity upon the ancient foundations of its rich and complex history.